stories acceptance criteria, which we skipped last time. So we'll cover that in detail this time. And the third is we'll look at a tool. We'll look at Crucible this time, which is a code review tool, and we'll spend about 10 minutes towards the end just talking about that. So, and we'll leave some room for the question and answers towards the end as well. But feel free to write your questions in the questions box, and I'll get to it when we are transitioning between the topics. Okay, so sprint planning. It is also called iteration planning. Sprint is more of a Scrum terminology. But iteration planning is a general term used across different methodologies in Agile. So you can choose to call whatever you like, sprint planning or iteration planning. They both mean the same thing. So what is it? Sprint planning is an effort in which product owner describes the highest priority stories in the product backlog, and the team, including the product owner, then drives clarity to decide which stories they can commit to a given sprint. Okay, so a little lengthy definition here. I have highlighted the key points here. So product owner is nothing but the analyst, business analyst or system analyst, whatever we would like to call, in a traditional way of thinking. Product owner is the one who is talking to the customers, stakeholders, gathering requirements, analyzing things, and then uh, uh, you know trying to understand what is needed in the product to give value to our customer. So as we all know, product owner owns the product backlog, and in sprint planning you can see they describe the highest priority stories in the product backlog. Okay, so last time we learned about how the product needs to be prioritized. It has to have stories in certain ranking, so that we know what we want to work on first. So based on the prioritization in the product backlog, the team comes together and they drive clarity. Drive clarity is another buzzword in Agile, used very often. It means a lot of things. It means um, understanding what the product owner wants in the story, going through the description, maybe updating the description if needed, uh, having a lot of conversation around that story with various different people within the team or maybe outside the team. Um, Also doing estimations. Okay, so we are doing everything here. So once product owner has described their intention of the stories which are of highest priority in the product backlog at that time, the team comes together, they start understanding the story in detail, they start doing estimations based on that, and then based on the estimation, they commit to which stories in those priorities they can accomplish in a particular sprint or iteration. Okay, so very, very important ceremony or meeting. Also note that this may or may not be a time boxed activity. Okay, a sprint planning in practical world spans for days together. It is not unusual that the team sets aside some hours every day for a stretch of days just to do sprint planning for the upcoming sprint. Okay, so it is not necessary that everybody comes together and in just one meeting they are able to produce any output after sprint planning. Okay, so it can span days or a length of duration. Also, very quickly, let's look at the inputs and the output. So the input to a sprint planning is the product backlog. Okay, and product backlog can be in various different flavors. It can be prioritized backlog, release backlog, risk adjusted backlog. We saw that last week. Okay, and the output is the sprint backlog. I should correct the spelling there. The sprint backlog is the list of the stories stack ranked that are committed for execution in that particular sprint. Okay, and the tools that can be used for doing sprint planning, various tools. Okay, there are prioritization techniques which are obviously needed, not just by product owner but also by the whole team. So prioritization techniques, I'm going to take a separate session on just the prioritization technique. Then there are estimation techniques. So how do we do estimations of the user stories, which is also a very, very interesting topic, and very complex, can get very complex too. So I'll be taking a separate session on that as well. Velocity is another very important term in Agile. Okay, velocity, for now you can understand that it is the amount of work a team can do in a particular sprint. That is a velocity of the team. Okay, so that is also another technique that is used. And then team calendar. Okay, so when you're working in a team, you can understand, there could be vacation time, there could be resource that may be available, not available for a certain duration. So we have to take that into account as well when we are committing to finishing stories in a particular sprint. Okay, so the input is product backlog, output is sprint backlog. All right, so this is the flashcard sprint planning. Let's move on. Okay, so if you remember, the second agenda in the in today's session is acceptance criteria. Okay, so if you remember, when I was talking about user stories a couple of weeks ago, there are 3 C's that are very important in the user stories. Okay, they are card, conversation, and confirmation. Okay, the acceptance criteria that we are going to talk about in detail pertains to the confirmation part of it. So we looked at the card, how the user stories are written in a particular template a couple of weeks ago, uh, and how it is useful to write it in that particular template, and then how there's a conversation that goes as a part of driving clarity, discussions, estimations, etc., which is the second C, conversation. And then the third C, which is confirmation, which is very, very important. Okay, brings a completeness to the user story. Also is one of the mandatory attributes of a story. Okay, so we're going to talk about that. So acceptance criteria. Okay, why do we need acceptance criteria first? Let me just talk about that a little bit before we look at this template. So um, it, it the acceptance criteria becomes a starting point for the QA engineering or QA team. Okay, they understand what is really expected at the end of the completion of the story. Okay, so the story description itself does not describe that, but the acceptance criteria does. Okay, also it becomes it defines a lot of things while we write the acceptance criteria. It includes inputs from the customer, it includes prerequisite assumptions, etc. It tells you exactly what scenarios we are looking at from the high level, okay, and what is the expected result. Okay, so very important. The template that I'm showing you here on the screen right now, this is um, not as popular as the story writing template, but it is gaining popularity very, very quickly, and it is very useful. I've been using this template for more than 2-3 years now, and I cannot imagine using anything else. Okay, this is probably the best way, and I've converted so many people starting to use this kind of template. So what does it look like? Okay, so again, it has 3 parts to it. Okay, the first one is a precondition. So you start writing given certain precondition when a certain event happens, which is combination of an actor and action. So when a particular event happens, then what are the observable results? Okay, so simple, 3-part uh, elaboration, um, and you can understand that this, there's a lot of power in the simplicity of this template, just like we have for the user story template. One of the important power here is that it may or may not be very, very technical. Okay, so anyone who is looking at it, even if they're not technical, anyone from CEO down to um, all the way down to documentation engineer, Q engineers, they all should be able to understand and relate to the acceptance criteria and understand it, how it pertains to them. Okay, so another very important advantage of using some acceptance criteria template in this form. Important note here, acceptance criteria is not a replacement for test cases. Okay, it is a user scenario, elaboration of a user scenario, but we still need test plan, we still need test cases. It is a starting point for the QA engineering to start writing their test plan or test cases. Okay, let's look at an example. Okay, using the same template, start the first part. Given the logged in user has admin privileges, when he or she attempts to enter a valid combination of account and routing number to transfer funds, then the funds are transferred through the payment gateway and a success message is displayed. Okay, so you can absorb the amount of information it has provided in just 3 simple sentences here. And it is written in a very non-technical language per se. So so that everybody can benefit from from this verbiage. Okay, not just the technical staff. So given the precondition, which is the logged in user has admin privileges, when some event happens, which is the actor is the user who's has the admin privileges, when they enter a valid combination of account and routing number to transfer funds, then what is the expected behavior? Okay, the funds are transferred through the payment gateway and the success message is also displayed to the user. Okay, so this would create maybe just one acceptance criteria of a story. So it is not unusual that one story has a list of acceptance criterias. Okay, and which is very practical in the real world. When you start writing stories and you have very well written stories pertaining to the invest principle and all, you will notice that the acceptance criteria, there may be a list. Okay, having an acceptance criteria with a very long list is also a bad idea. That means that you are crossing the boundary of starting to create test cases or scenarios. So you want to keep the acceptance criteria at a high level and focusing on the user scenarios rather than anything else. Okay, so why do we need acceptance criteria in such template? Okay, there are many advantages of doing that. So there are advantages of using acceptance criteria that that those set aside. What are the advantages of using this acceptance criteria template? Okay, so the first and the foremost advantage is that it is thought provoking. Okay, when you are forced to write an acceptance criteria in this template form, as a product owner, you are forced to think of the scenario in depth. Also, you are forced to think of all the scenarios that pertain to a user story. Okay, so what's happening here is that uh, the template itself, by its design, is encouraging the product owner to look at all the scenarios to understand and update, if required, the user story, the actual description of the user story, depending on what is expected. Okay, very, very important advantage. Okay, the second advantage is that it encourages conversation, especially with the right people. Okay, imagine you are a product owner, you are an analyst, and you have written a story. Now you have to write the acceptance criteria. So you're looking at all the scenarios that you have in your mind, and it is very likely that you do not know the expected behavior in certain cases, or what the user is expecting, what the customer is expecting in certain cases. So the product owner, or the author of the user story, is forced to communicate with the right people, with the right personas, as they call them in Agile, especially customers. Okay, so this is again, another part where Agile is engaging customer in, in every aspect, in different phases of the project life cycle. So it encourages conversation with the right people. Okay, you want to get the information from the source, people who are going to use, the actual customer who wants the value in the product. The third advantage of using this template is that it is documenting the prerequisites and the assumptions. So if you look at the example again, the prerequisite or the precondition here is already written down in the first sentence. Okay, given the logged in user has admin privileges. Okay, so this is the precondition you're starting with. Okay, also, if there are any assumptions, they surface as a process of writing these acceptance criteria. Okay, most of the time, I'm sure you are all very experienced, managers or engineers. You know from your experience that the amount of confusion, the conflict that can prevail because of taking assumptions. Okay, so Agile is very good at, um, making sure that things are not left to assumptions, things are not left to interpretations. Okay, so automatically, if you're writing your acceptance criteria in this template, the assumptions will surface, and whether they are valid assumptions or invalid assumptions, you would know by doing conversation. Okay, by doing a little more analysis, a little deeper analysis, which is invaluable. And the last advantage, and certainly not the least, is the risk avoidance. Um, in our experience, I am sure we have all come across bugs or issues towards the end of the development or QA, where we find out that we started out with the wrong scenario, or we started out with wrong assumptions, or we started out with some analysis that was incomplete, and we built some product. We wrote code on a design or a certain scenario which was half baked or not completely thought through. Okay, so you can imagine one analyst bug, I think you'll all agree, is equivalent to maybe 10 functional bugs in the product. Okay, the severity of an analyst bug is very high, and sometimes the cause of extreme dissatisfaction in customers. So by using this acceptance criteria template and engaging the customer, you are automatically thinking through all the scenarios. There is very little room left for any analyst bugs, any bugs that would result because of incomplete or partial analysis. Okay, so huge advantage. Okay, so you are instilling quality just you know at the time of writing the user story. This is a part of the user story. Acceptance criteria is a rudimentary, mandatory part of a user story. Okay, if you are developers, if you're working in teams, if you're working as a scrum master or even project manager, whenever you see a user story and you don't see an acceptance criteria attached to it, that is a red flag for you. It has to be sent back to the analyst, or it has to be discussed. And you don't want to work on a story or even plan for a story if it does not have an acceptance criteria. And if you force them to write acceptance criteria using this template, you will instill a very high quality in your requirements, which is coming in form of user stories. Okay, so with that, I know I'm going a little fast today. We may be finishing in about 20, 25 minutes or so. But I want to open the channel for any questions that may be there. Let me see. Okay. Okay, there's a question on sprint planning. Okay, so yeah, so the sprint planning is something that we do before the sprint starts, of course. So you want to finish your sprint planning when your sprint starts. So once the prerequisite for starting a sprint is that you have finished all your plan, you have committed for the user stories that you know you will be able to complete in a particular sprint. There are exceptions, of course, and we will talk about them. There are stories that can span multiple iterations, multiple sprints. So there could be exceptions like that, but you absolutely have to finish the sprint planning before you kick off or start the sprint. Okay. More questions. Difference between acceptance criteria and test cases. Aren't they both the same? Acceptance criteria, test cases, they are two different things. Okay, so let me give you an example here. Okay, so going back to the example that I have in the presentation, I'm just going back to that slide. So if you look at this particular scenario, okay, a test case is a very detailed expansion of the scenario. And one, for this scenario, what is uh, uh, depicted here, you can imagine there could be multiple test cases that you will produce. The test cases also include test data in them. What is the actual result? When you execute them, you have to compare them with the actual results. What's the expected result? But you can imagine that this is a higher level scenario or a use case. It is not really a detailed test case. Test cases are much more granular, and they contain test data as well. Okay. Also, the execution results and everything, when QA is executing, they are logged against the test case and not the acceptance criteria. Okay. More questions. Is there a template for test case? Test case development and management is a big subject in itself. There are various tools that are available even before Agile came into being. There are many tools that are available for test case management, like Zypher. I know a few. There's Zypher, there's Bugzilla. There are a couple more. Uh, I think Jira also have a plugin for test case management. There are tools from Mercury Interactive. There are tools from I think a couple more vendors, very premium vendors. So the whole test case management is a big area in itself. It is not something that we can solve by just having a template. Okay, so but yes, when we talk about testing in Agile, which is also going to be a big subject for us, hopefully you'll all be there. When we talk about testing, you'll see how what is the role of a QA, how the testers are expected to work off of, what are their artifacts, what are they expected to produce. Okay, so we'll talk more about them. Okay, more questions. Okay. Yes, sprint planning and iteration planning, they're both the same things. Sprint planning is more used in a Scrum methodology, which is the most popular methodology. And yes, it has to be finished before your sprint starts. Okay, another question. Yes, so the question is, what happens if there are changes needed after the sprint has started? Very good question, and this is a very practical thing that happens in our daily in a usual agile environment. So the sprint has started, you committed for certain stories, and now you realize that the product owner realized that there's a customer facing priority and it has to be fixed ASAP and things like that. So there are concepts like story swapping or punting stories or scope creep. There are all these things that come into a picture, and we will be taking, I'll be taking these as flashcards. It's possible that if you haven't started, in a simple scenario where you haven't started working on a committed story in a sprint, and there's another story which your product owner wishes to complete to satisfy one of our customers as a part of that sprint, and has an almost equal estimate, you can swap that story with the new one. Okay. Not very easy to do always, but that is one of the easiest way of looking at it. Okay, yes, I will be sending the slides. There will be a recording of this whole session and it'll go on YouTube. So you will have it. I still have to upload the one from last week. I'll be doing both of them together. Okay, another question. Okay, so the question is, during the sprint planning and execution, in case the stories and sprint completed before expected, then what is the practices followed? Okay, so usually what happens is that you have a good sense of how many stories you can take based on the estimates. It's like, if you're done the estimation right, using the right techniques, and you know the velocity of your team, which is how much work your team as a whole can produce at the end. So it is um, you would reach a state of high performance or very optimal performance, where you would be able to finish everything that you committed. Obviously it doesn't happen in the real world. So what happens is that if the story finishes early in your question, um, the product owner, if you remember, is owns the product backlog, and they are expected to keep their backlog in a prioritized state. Okay, so if you finish certain story early and it turns out that you have more bandwidth in that sprint than you originally planned for, you can decide to pull one of the top stories in the backlog at that time and run in a running sprint. Or if you may pull that story in, but yet not commit to finishing it in that sprint itself, so it'll kind of become a head start for the next sprint. Okay, so you'll have to adjust your remaining estimate in that story, which is a head start in the next sprint. Okay, so there are tools, agile tools that are available, uh, which will allow you to accurately calculate the remaining estimate for the whole sprint, even when there are head starts. All right, so don't see any more questions. All right, so before I jump to the third part, which is looking at one of the agile tools, Crucible, I'm gonna have some polls which are kind of questions based on what we have learned so far today. So let's look at the first question. Okay, so you should all see a question on your screen with 4 options. Please read the question yourself and select the best option. I'll give you a couple of minutes. All right, so the correct answer here is sprint backlog. So almost all of you got it right. So let me just go back to the slide. So if you see the sprint planning, so the question was, what is the output of the sprint planning meeting? The output is a sprint backlog. Okay, Product backlog, some of you answered product backlog. Product backlog is an input to sprint planning. Okay, so the product manager manages the product backlog, and based on their highest priority items in the product backlog, the team comes together and creates a sprint backlog, okay, which is the output. Okay, very good. Let's do one more poll. Actually, there are two more, okay? Two more good ones. Okay, so next question. Please go ahead and answer. Okay, the next question on your screen now. Okay, very good. The correct answer, so the question is, what should be included in stories acceptance criteria? And the answer is actually all of the above: prerequisites, assumptions, actions, and resulting behavior. I see a lot of you selected actions and resulting behaviors, which is the correct option as well. But um, if you understand the template, the acceptance criteria, and what should go in there, the prerequisite and assumptions are also factored in the acceptance criteria. They should not go unnoticed. Okay, that is a whole point of writing an acceptance criteria in a certain form. Okay, so the correct answer here is all of the above: prerequisites, assumptions, actions, and resulting behavior. Okay. Any questions on or concerns about the answers of the questions? I'll be happy to eradicate that. See if there are any questions. Oh, there are quite a few. What are invest principle and epics? Okay, so invest principle is something that I discussed in uh, the previous webinars. So invest principle is one of the guidelines. So I stands for independent, N stands for negotiable, V stands for valuable, E stands for estimatable, S for small, and T for testable. Okay, so this is a guideline given to you when you're writing user stories. Epics are, we talked about them last Friday. Epics are another is a way of organizing your stories. So it is, something at a high level. You use the same user story template, but you write an epic which is decomposed into multiple stories. An epic should decompose at least in two user stories. Okay. Okay, so there's a question on sprint planning. Normally the sprint planning is supposed to be X hours, where X is the sprint length in weeks, but you mentioned that sprint planning is not time boxed. Aren't we supposed to uh, aren't we supposed to do the product grooming in grooming sessions? Okay, so good question. Uh, why isn't sprint planning time boxed? Okay, that is the essence of the question, I believe. Uh, so sprint planning is a complex activity. It's not something that you can do in a one closed door meeting. There are a lot of conversation that is needed. There's a lot of parties that you have to talk to. There's a lot of analysis that you have to do in your mind and understand what is requested. Look at the code, look at the design, understand things, talk to architects, etc. So it's hard to put a time box around it, even if you have a time box sprint. Okay, because you can understand there could be stories which will require a deeper analysis and much more discussion than others, and there could be sprints where you would have all stories which are easily understood, very clear, simple. So in that case, your sprint planning would take less amount of time. Okay, so I personally, from my experience, um, you don't want to time box it. However, you cannot just continue doing sprint planning forever. Okay, usually teams, they find a rhythm. as they go sprint after sprint, so they know when to start the sprint planning for the for the upcoming sprint. Usually I start doing sprint planning for the next sprint 5 or 6 days, 4 or 5 days in advance. My sprints are 2 weeks long, so when I'm halfway through into my sprint, I start doing the sprint planning. I initiate the sprint planning for the next week. It doesn't mean that I'm doing sprint planning, just sprint planning every day for all those 3 or 4 days, but it is going on as a parallel effort, consuming some of the time of the team members. Okay, so you want to factor in that time when you're doing sprint planning. Uh, Also, this is where the velocity comes into picture. So you know the velocity of your team, you can do a very good sprint planning. You don't have to, you are not constrained, or you don't have to be worried about how much time your sprint planning is going to take itself. Okay, a lot of teams also, they want they uh, once they finish the sprint, they do just sprint planning for the next sprint. They don't start sprints back to back. Okay, so they time box 2 or 3 days in between two sprints, just to do the sprint planning, which is also another way of handling being agile. Okay, but you want to do what works for your team. Okay, scrum.org specifies time box 8 hours for a 4 week sprint. Yes, that is true. Um, it is a good reference where you want to set aside 8 hours for sprint planning. What I was commenting on was that it is possible that you may take less than 8 hours or more than 8 hours. You want to set aside some time. You don't want to time box it in terms of the calendar. Okay, you may want to start your sprint planning early on before the next sprint starts. Okay, but there's always once you find your rhythm, you can very confidently tell that, okay, I'm going to need 8 hours or 10 hours for my sprint planning. Okay. All right. See, I think I've answered all the questions. Let's quickly look at a quick time check. We have 10, 15 more minutes left. I was hoping I'll finish early today, but it's okay. It's a good discussion. So let's move on and let's look at Crucible. Okay. So as usual, we'll I like to see things in action. So Crucible is one of the code review tools that I have been using for years together, and I absolutely love it. I strongly suggest there are other code review tools as well. I remember evaluating about 3 years ago, but Crucible was a clear winner. How it works is how I'm going to show you. So one thing to remember, it has a very strong integration with Jira. It is free. The Crucible plugin for Jira is free. Um, so if you're using Jira already, it'll be very easy for you to start using Crucible. If you're not, then also you can start. Then also you can use Crucible. Let me give you a demo of how. So let's say you have a user story. So I'm using Jira as usual. Again, just a disclaimer, Cert School or myself do not have any association with Jira. It is just one of the tools that we have started to look into first. We'll be looking at many more. So I'm using Jira for my work, and let's say there's one story here, and I committed some code for this. So if I scroll down, you'll see all these sub tabs here. If I go into the source tab, it will show me the code commits that I have done for this particular stories. Okay, so you can see there have been 2 code commits by me. So what I can do is, if I have Crucible integrated with my Jira, increase the font here, um, it will show me create Crucible review. Okay, so when I click on it, it will take me to the screen. You have to have a project, Crucible project name. In our case, it is OOCR. So I select that, and then I can enter the name of the reviewers. Okay, so I'm going to select Ben as a reviewer. I'm going to select Nitin. as a reviewer. So the good thing here that code review. So code review, as we all understand for software projects, is very very important. Okay, so I was reading a paper the other day. You find more bugs and more issues in code review rather than the actual QA or test simulations. So very important process. I don't think I have to lay any emphasis with this group on code review. So there are always challenges with doing code reviews, especially when the teams are distributed. So Crucible is a very, very good tool to do that. And you can see that you can have multiple reviewers for a story, okay, a code that is written for a story. Okay, so I selected Ben and Nitin here, and I can click on the start review. Okay, so start review is the first phase in the life cycle of a code review. Okay, so in this case, I mean, this is a very simple, I was doing some POC. So I have this one file. So you can see it will appear as an OOCR 1855 against the story from which I initiated. And this is how the view would look like. Okay, so this is a very simplistic view. I wanted to show you an example of a little more complex code review that I just recently did. So this is another code review artifact. Okay, 1852, you can see. Okay, and you can see there are multiple files that are committed here. Okay, so your Crucible has a link with the repository, your version control repository, and it can pull the code and the differences in the code between the two versions and give you this nice view. Okay, so that you can look at what has changed. So the files that you see in red here, they are the files which are new. So in this case, im-jms-context file is a new file altogether. You'll also see the versions, or the in the version control versions. So in this case, there were two commits done for the same story, and you can see what was the difference between the first and the second version. And if there were more than two commits for the same story, you can see between first and third, second and third, and so on. You have different kind of views that are available. So let's look at one of the files where the existing files where the code was added. So I'm going to look into this file. Okay, so you can see there it will show you all the lines which were added in green, and you will see all the lines that are deleted in red. Okay, and the good thing here is that as a code reviewer, you can just select one line and write a review about that. So you can have a discussion about one line. Like in this case, you can see I'm having discussion with Arvind here. So you can just select one line, you can write your comment. So for example, let me change the view here. So by default, it shows about 3 or 4 lines before and after the changes. But you can see the whole context, or more than just 3 lines. So let me just switch it to 20 lines. So in this case, if I don't like the name of this method, I can click on this line, and I can write a comment, change the method name to something else. Okay, and I can post it. I'm not going to do that right now. So like that, you can see that I have posted some comments, and there are some discussions going on based on those comments. Once you have finished that code review, okay, it has reached a point where the author and all the reviewers agree. You can mark the code review as complete. Okay, so from the life cycle point of view, you have a code review that is open, and then it starts. Then it is in the draft state, which means that it is ongoing, in progress. And once the review is complete, you can mark it complete as a reviewer, and the person who's the author, like in this case Arvind is the author who initiated the code review, who implemented the story. Once the code review is complete, he can summarize. So summarize is the last state in Crucible for a code review. Okay, there are stories which are complex, lengthy, need a lot of communication, a lot of code changes. It is not unusual that the code review, there'll be 2 or 3 rounds of code review. Okay, so 2 or 3 rounds of code review is not very unusual at all. Um, Also, you can have, if there are multiple reviewers looking at one single file for doing code review, you would see a little box here. Unfortunately, it's just me right now who's looking at this code review. So you'll see a little box and it'll show you how many reviewers are also looking at the same code, same file. Um, if you want, you can edit the details of this code review. You can click on edit details. And if you want to add more content, this is another power of Crucible. So you click on add content, and then there are different options available. You can browse the change sheet. So if I click on that, you can see that there were more commits, code commits that were done after the last one uh, was included in this code review. So you can select these and you can also add them. Click on add more content. It will appear as a third circle here in this code review cycle. Okay, so you can see the difference between various different versions. Okay, so that is about Crucible. Also, just one last thing. There is a gadget. So if I go back on Jira dashboard, so there's a gadget, cool gadget that is available from Crucible. So you can, in this case, I can see how many code review requests were created, how many of them were summarized, how many are ongoing, how many haven't started, breakdown by days or weeks or months. Okay, so I'm looking at past 3 months, I think. So you can see there have been total 920, out of which so many have been summarized, so many are in draft, and so many are haven't started the review. Okay, so very, very cool tool for people who are using Jira and anybody who's interested in doing thorough code reviews. Okay, I just cannot imagine putting code out there without having going through the code review process, extensive code review process. Okay, so let's see if there are any more questions. Let me see if I finish the Crucible. Oh yeah, and then the integration with the version control. So we are using SVN here, but there are different version controls that are available in the market, and Crucible integrates with almost all of them. Okay, so if you're managers, you are evaluating tools for becoming more agile, doing a better code review, I strongly recommend that you use at least evaluate Crucible as your option. Okay, it's very nice and has never failed me. Okay. Any questions before we wind up? Okay, so I see that there was a question from Sprint Planning. Scrum.org specifies sprint should be started back to back, and sprint planning should be included in sprint, not outside the sprint. Yes, that is correct. Um, at the same time, you can understand that Scrum is one of the methodologies, one of the agile methodologies. Okay, if you're using Scrum, yes, you want to do sprints back to back without any gaps in between. However, as we all know, Agile is a collection of practices and values. Okay, so Scrum is one of the methodologies. There are other methodologies as well, and you can create your own custom methodology that is suited for your organization, your team. As long as you're following those Agile practices, you are Agile. Okay, so I have come across teams which give gap in between two sprints just to focus on planning. Okay, it may work for you, it may not work for you, but it is really your choice. You want to find your own zen place, how you want to run your agile teams. Okay, all right, so okay, so just the last slide. If you have any questions that I was not able to answer or you were not able to ask here, feel free to contact me. I'm on Twitter. Gmail, LinkedIn. Feel free to connect with me. When you're connecting with me on LinkedIn, please specify how you know me. If it is through this forum, that will really help me. Also, one last thing before we adjourn is that the next free webinar is going to happen on 12th of July. There is no webinar next Friday, and subsequently we will have 1 hour free webinar on every other Friday. So from 12th July, you will give a break on one Friday, and then we'll have it on the subsequent Friday.